Hi and welcome to the Poem of the Month. This first month the choice is the Twa Dogs, and I'll put a link into the description. Take a surf over to rbwf.org.uk and navigate to the text through Poem of the Month. I've chosen the Twa Dogs as the first poem of the month for a couple of reasons. Although the poem is set in June, a nice vignette focuses on that merry day the year begins. Of course, a more obvious New Year's poem would have been the old farmer's New Year morning salutation to his old mare Maggie. However, this excellent poem is amongst the richest of Burns's output in terms of his use of Lolland's vocabulary. In contrast, the Twa Dogs is relatively accessible, and probably not coincidentally, Burns himself chose it to be the first of his poems laid before the general public. It appears first in each edition of Burns's poetry prepared under his own hand. The premise is simple. Two dogs, one belonging to a rural labourer, the other to a member of the landed gentry, discuss the relevant pros and cons of their respective owners' very different fortunes. Animal fables have a long tradition, one not underrepresented in Scotland, as Tom Crawford has pointed out. On social commentary, anthropomorphism is a wonderful tool, for it allows the artist to divorce himself from contentious issues. It has long been accepted that Burns used as his immediate model Robert Ferguson's The Mutual Complaint of Plainstanes and Cossey, and indeed both works share the same octosyllabic couplet. The dogs, however, are not so much in the business of flighting as are the thoroughfares. Flighting is an instinctive, never malicious exchange of insults that Scots take for granted, and which can often seem to outsiders a display of open enmity. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, most Scots feel that they cannot fully trust an individual until they are comfortable enough to flight with one another. But whilst the Plainstanes and Cossey derive comedy from this traditional exchange, and as later Burns was too in his pentameter Twa Briggs, the dogs enjoy a far more settled dialogue, of genuine interest in each other's comparative station. Burns quite naturally sets the poem very close to home, that place in Scotland's Isle that bears the name of Old King Goyle. Jerry Carruthers has pointed out that Scotland is not of itself an island, and in the pretence that it is, Burns displays, I think, a wilful desire to extricate from union. That Burns has an undying affinity with Kyle is probably best evinced by the manifesto laid out in his epistle to Willie Simpson, Ochiltree. We'll sing all Kyle's plains and fells, our moors red brown wi' heather bells, our banks and braes, our dens and dales, where noble Wallace aft boor the gree, as story tells, frae Southron billies. King Coil is the same old King Cole of nursery rhyme, a factual king of northern Britain, probably Strathclyde, during the 4th or 5th centuries, just as Picts and Scots were beginning to coalesce. It is conjectured that he probably met his end in battle at Coilsfield, very close to Turbown. Daniel Defoe, author of Robinson Crusoe, in his A Tour Through the Whole Island of Great Britain, wrote that a trumpet resembling a crooked horn was dug up in this area. This artefact, known as the Caprington horn, still survives, and is the oldest dated musical instrument ever found in Scotland. It's in private hands, although a replica of it exists in the collections of the National Museums of Scotland in Edinburgh. Burns has a wonderful touch in scene setting. 6 lines to paint a picture which, although the poem is very localised in terms of geography, he immediately makes accessible to all in his cast of characters next assembled. He introduces first the great Newfoundland, Caesar. We know him to belong to this breed since Labradors, another new breed hailing from parts where sailors gang to fish for cod are of no great size. Gentleman and scholar go together now so prodigiously in the Scots psyche that perhaps we miss this first invocation of the pairing. At this period, only a gentleman had access to books plentiful enough to make pretence at scholarship. Later in the poem, Caesar himself disavows the notion that civility goes hand in hand with good sense. No prig is he. We are at once made aware of his liberal notions, not simply because he's happy to relieve himself in the company of a far lesser breeds, as Liam McIlvany discusses. More than that, we know that priests are laying claim to territory by urinating. By sharing the act with totted tykes, Caesar makes himself at once the most generous and gregarious of souls. We know that Burns intends, at least in part, to pay tribute to his own late lamented pet collie, but should take care to assume too much in terms of the station of the fictional Lou as master. We can detect a hint of self-deprecation here, though. Burns, in the flush of youthful enthusiasm, had named his own dog after Cuchulain's dog in Macpherson's Ossian. Now, aware of the contention presently raging with regards to the cycle's authenticity, he chooses to look askance at this with her eye lang syne. Lord kens how lang. It's an interesting and very deft treatment. He doesn't altogether discount the possibility of veracity in the account, a matter displaying as much maturity as it does respect for the artistry of a fellow maker. Caesar's chosen register could easily have been an English one, indeed in performances tempting to effect a Kelvinside accent when portraying the dog, but Burns steadfastly holds to the vision of Caesar as benevolent patrician. He had, of course, known a few, not least of all Provost Ferguson and Gavin Hamilton, and the Scots tongue had not altogether fled the gentry at this day. So Burns has Caesar adopt Lallans very democratically alongside his companion. One wonders if a Canadian accent could have existed by this stage. He begins by musing on Luath's own condition, but immediately deviates to the condition of the Cotter's household. He knows well himself how the great house operates. Those whose very existence is bound up with making his master comfortable benefit greatly, as Adam Smith would have expected, from the conspicuous consumption of the laird, but those whose labour raises the landowner's stake by improvement of the agricultural land, their lot is an unknown quantity. The whipper-in seems to be universally read as a human character by commentators, but I demur. Given the impersonal tone of Caesar, I am given to think more of another canine, probably a beagle, as the huntsman's assistant. This makes the affront of the superior state of those bound to the great house still more acute. The gulf between the tenant farmer and his quarters is seldom stated, but a gulf did exist, and it could be vast. In Ayrshire, admittedly, the tenant farmers were among the poorest in Scotland, so the distinction was slighter than it may otherwise have been. Since it suited Burns's own agenda almost to pretend it didn't exist, it's little wonder that confusion reigns concerning Burns's own station in life, but he seldom found himself under a roof without employed servants during his entire life. Luath's fictional master is a different breed, entirely dependent on the boon of others. And in our knowledge of the Burnesses' affliction following the death of their kindly benefactor at Mount Oliphant, we view the want of master as a personal remembrance, further blurring the boundary twixt tenant and cotter. Burns himself seems to idealise cotters as noble savages. In two existing texts of the song Poortith Called, he talks of the blessed state of an individual. In one text that individual is a wildwood Indian, in the other a simple cotter. Other examples are to be found in songs such as The Bonnie Lass of Ballochmyle. So, when Burns talks of the cotter's hondark, there seems almost an air of wistfulness that anyone should lead such a carefree lifestyle. The same wistfulness indeed he displays toward vagrancy in his epistle to Davy, and most famously, the Jolly Beggars. The fictional Luath we hear is huffed and cuffed and disrespected. Surely then this can't be Burns's own dog, the same who was so affected by Mealy, by a field mouse, by a daisy, and yet this is exactly the treatment reserved by the landowner for those building his own enclosures. If anything, the tenant can fear even worse from the laird's agents. Better surely to be ignored or disdained by the gentry than bullied by his employees, individuals, mind you, who are not responsible for the sowing of their master's wealth, purely its harvest. The cotter bears little of this, of course. He is only to provide the labour due to his tenant, and then is free to live his life as he chooses. In the following vignette, the barrier between cotter and tenant is blown clean away as rural life at every station unite in common recreation. Only in a tenant's dwelling could young'uns ranting through the house. Here is a picture very closely drawn in Ferguson's Farmer's Ingle, but with a religious admixture which couldn't be denied in Ayrshire as they talk of patronage and priests with kindling fury of their breese. David Dykes is keen to point to the absence of sentimentality which he abhors in the Cotter's Saturday Night, but as I previously argued, religious observance could no more be ignored in Burns's experience than could the realities of farm labour. Lewis ends his reverie with an acceptance that Caesar has justly identified a grave inequality, and that hard-working individuals do indeed suffer under the duress of overzealous factors trying to ingratiate themselves with gentlemen who must needs be absent in the correct governance of the country. At this stage, Caesar feels he must interject. In his experience, absentee landlords are busy either currying favour for advancement with the ruling classes or frittering away their estates in a useless pursuit of the grand tour. I believe more than any passage this monody served to persuade James Boswell that a meeting with Burns would be a quite uneven meeting of souls. For the passage may have been painting the famous biographer himself. Having studied for the bar with Henry Dundas, he was certainly minded to say aye or no as put the younger bid him, and his prodigious talent for profligacy is too well established to require reinforcement here. Lewis' indignation at this is cunningly centred not on the morality of the gentry's actions, but in the labour wasted to build wealth only to be squandered instead of reinvested in the rural economy. He argues for a paradigm where landowners spend their time on their own estates. Finally, he attempts to ascertain whether true happiness is the lot of the rich, sheltered as they are by their capital from the dangers besetting the lower rural strata. Caesar disavows him. In keeping with Robert Ferguson's farmer, he believes that true happiness belongs to those who labour honestly. Intrigue breeds only suspicion, chaos, and empty luxury. The poem is tied up by a coda section, missing from Ferguson's model, reminding us that we have in the end been listening only to dogs, that they are free from social prejudice, and that their communion is in no way suspicious nor injurious. Why can't the same lot belong to us? I hope you found this rewarding to listen to, and that you'll read the poem through yourself to draw your own conclusions. Please post freely in the comments on the website, YouTube or Facebook, however you came across it, and I look forward to speaking again soon.